Havana. The first week of 1960. A private car moves fast through the streets of a city that no longer belongs to the people inside it. In the back sits a member of one of the richest families in Cuba. Behind them is a distillery their family has owned for almost 100 years, the most famous rum house in the world. Ahead of them is the airport, and a single suitcase, and a decision that has to be made in the next few hours. They are not driving to a funeral. Nobody in the family has died. But something is ending tonight, and everyone in that car knows it, and not one of them will say it out loud. What is happening to this family in the winter of 1960 will turn them into something no luxury dynasty had ever been before. Not victims. Something far stranger and far more dangerous. This is the story of a deaf immigrant who started with a shed and a colony of fruit bats, a family that built the best-selling rum on earth, and the night a revolution took all of it in a single stroke. It is a story about what a very rich family decides to do when everything they own is taken at once. To understand all of it, we have to go back. Because the Bacardis did not simply lose an empire. They chose, that winter, to spend the rest of the century getting it back. And the way they chose to do it is the darkest part of the whole story. It begins on an island with a man who could barely hear. His name was Facundo Bacardi Masso. He was born in Spain in 1814, in the region of Catalonia, and while still a teenager, he sailed to Cuba to make his fortune. Santiago de Cuba, on the far eastern end of the island, was a hot and crowded port town built on sugar, and sugar meant rum. But the rum of that time was rough. It was harsh, cheap liquor that working men drank because they had nothing better. No one thought of rum as something fine. Facundo thought differently. For years he experimented. He worked at the chemistry of it like a problem to be solved, filtering the spirit through charcoal to strip out the harshness, aging it in oak barrels to make it smooth, cultivating a specific strain of yeast that is still used by the company to this day. That strain became so central to the recipe that, by some accounts, the family made sure the living culture left Cuba with them when they fled, so that the taste itself could never be seized along with the buildings. He was trying to do something nobody believed was possible. He was trying to make rum a drink for the elegant, not just the desperate. Rough rum burned going down. His was meant to be sipped, in good company, by people who had a choice of what to drink, and chose this. In 1862, he bought a small distillery in Santiago and put the family name on it. Facundo Bacardi and Company. In the rafters of that first building lived a colony of fruit bats. In Cuban folk belief, the bat was a symbol of good fortune and family unity, and Facundo's wife suggested they put one on the bottle. It was a decision that would prove brilliant. Much of the island could not read, but everyone could recognize a picture. People began asking not for Bacardi by name, but for the rum with the bat. The bat sold the bottle. Facundo had done the impossible. He had made rum smooth. He had made it desirable. He had made it a name. And from the very beginning, that name was tangled up with something else, something that would eventually cost the family everything. Because the Bacardis were never content to simply make rum. They wanted a say in what happened to Cuba itself. That instinct built them, and that instinct would one day put them on a collision course with history. For a while, the instinct looked like destiny. Facundo's sons took the company forward, and one son in particular, Emilio, became a hero of the Cuban struggle for independence from Spain. He was thrown in prison for it, exiled for it. When Cuba finally broke free, Emilio Bacardi became the first elected mayor of Santiago. The family that made the rum was now woven into the birth of the nation itself. In Santiago, they built a monument to the family name, and later, in Havana, a headquarters that still stands as one of the most beautiful buildings on the island. Then came the drink that made them global. In the early years of the 20th century, in the bars of Havana, bartenders mixed Bacardi white rum with lime and sugar and called it the daiquiri. They mixed it with cola and called it the Cuba Libre, free Cuba. A toast to the very independence the island had fought for. These were not just cocktails. They were the taste of a glamorous, sunlit island, and the whole world wanted a glass. By the middle of the century, Bacardi was enormous. They had built distilleries beyond Cuba, in Mexico, in Puerto Rico. They were one of the wealthiest and most respected families in the Caribbean. Their rum poured in every grand hotel from Havana to New York. American tourists sailed to Havana partly for the rum itself. During the years of Prohibition, when liquor was banned across the United States, Cuba marketed itself as the place Americans could come and drink legally in the sun, and Bacardi was what they came to drink. An entire island had become, in the world's imagination, the place you went to drink Bacardi. Few brands in history have ever been that closely bound to a country. At its height in Cuba, the family fortune ran into many tens of millions of dollars, an immense sum for the time, built entirely on a spirit that a deaf immigrant had willed into existence from a rented shed. The Bacardis had everything. A beloved brand, a beautiful country, and a family name that stood for both. And then a young lawyer came down from the mountains, and the family made a decision that would define them for the next 50 years. Before we go on, if you are finding this story worth your time, take 1 second and hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It genuinely helps more than you know, and it means the next story like this one finds its way to you. Every episode here is the true history behind a name you already know, the part the advertising never tells. Now, that young lawyer coming down from the mountains. To understand what the Bacardis did next, you have to understand that at first, they were on his side. His name was Fidel Castro. In the 1950s, Cuba was ruled by a dictator named Fulgencio Batista, a corrupt strongman propped up by foreign money and organized crime. Many respectable Cubans despised him, and the Bacardi family, with its long history of fighting for a free Cuba, despised him too. So when a young revolutionary began a rebellion against Batista from the mountains of the east, some in the Bacardi family did something that would later seem impossible to believe. They helped him. Members of the family and the company quietly supported the movement against Batista. They saw it as the same fight Emilio Bacardi had waged against Spain half a century earlier, the fight for a Cuba that belonged to Cubans. When Batista fled and the revolution swept into Havana on the first day of 1959, there were people inside Bacardi who believed they had backed the winning side of history. They were catastrophically wrong. At first it looked fine. The new government was welcomed. But within a year, the revolution began to turn, and it turned toward the very thing the Bacardis were, which was rich. The government began seizing private companies and estates, taking them from their owners and handing them to the state. Sugar mills, banks, factories. And then, in the autumn of 1960, the state came for the rum. In the great wave of nationalizations that swept the island that year, the Cuban government took the Bacardi assets, the distillery in Santiago that Facundo had bought in 1862, the beautiful headquarters in Havana, the stock, the barrels, the buildings, the land. Everything the family owned inside Cuba was taken in one stroke, and it was not coming back. A century of work. Gone between sunrise and nightfall. Managers arrived at the distillery to find it under the control of the state. The offices, the aging warehouses full of barrels, the bottling lines, the family name carved into the building. All of it now belonged to the government. There was no compensation. There was no appeal. There was a soldier at the gate and a signature on a decree. And that was the end of it. The family that had helped bring the revolution to power had just been devoured by it. But here is where the Bacardis became something no other dynasty had ever been. Any other family would have been destroyed. Stripped of the distilleries, the fortune, the homeland, they should have simply vanished into exile as broken, wealthy refugees. That is what happens to families when a revolution takes everything. That is not what happened here. Because years earlier, almost by accident, the Bacardis had done the one thing that would save them. They had built their business beyond Cuba. The distilleries in Puerto Rico and in Mexico were still theirs. And crucially, they had registered their most valuable possession of all outside the reach of the Cuban state. The trademark, the name, the bat. When the soldiers seized the distillery in Santiago, they got the buildings and the barrels, but they did not get the right to sell Bacardi rum to the world. In the years before the revolution, sensing the danger in a country that never seemed to stop tipping between chaos and dictatorship, the family had quietly moved the company's trademarks and key assets offshore into Nassau in the Bahamas, before the axe fell. It was a piece of caution that turned out to be the most valuable decision in the company's history. When Castro's government reached for Bacardi, its hand closed on the buildings and found the true prize already gone. The state was left holding a distillery it could not legally attach the world's most famous rum name to. It had the factory. It did not have the bat. So the state took the factory, and the family took the brand, and left. They scattered into exile, many of them to Miami, carrying almost nothing but the one thing that mattered. And from exile, this dispossessed family did something that turned grief into a 50-year campaign. They went to war with Fidel Castro. And they had the money, the connections, and the fury to actually do it. The rum that had been called Cuba Libre, free Cuba, now became the private fortune of a family whose single purpose was to free Cuba from the man who had robbed them. Bacardi money began to flow toward the cause of ending the Castro regime. Over the decades that followed, members of the family and figures connected to it became major backers of the anti-Castro movement in Exile, and used their wealth and influence to lobby against Havana at the highest levels of American power. The company that lost everything to a revolution spent the next half-century trying to reverse it. For the government in Havana, the war did not end at the border. It followed them into the bottle. Because there were now, in effect, two rums. There was Bacardi, made by the exiled family in Puerto Rico and sold to the world. And there was the distillery the state had seized in Santiago, which the Cuban government eventually used, in partnership with others, to build a rival rum. They called it Havana Club. What followed was one of the longest and most bitter brand wars in history. Bacardi and the Cuban state fought over rum names, over trademarks, over the very right to sell the taste of Cuba in courtrooms across the world for decades. It was a legal war fought with lawyers instead of soldiers, and it ran on for more than a generation because for the Bacardis this was never only about money. It was about a stolen homeland and a family that refused to concede it. And through all of it, the extraordinary thing happened. The rum kept selling. In fact, it conquered the world. Cut loose from Cuba, incorporated offshore, and run by a family in permanent exile, Bacardi did not shrink. It exploded. Freed from a single island, the company expanded across the entire planet, and the little bat from a Santiago rooftop became the best-selling premium rum brand on Earth. Over the following decades, the family bought other giants of the drinks world, adding one famous name after another to what had started with a shed full of fruit bats. Today, Bacardi Limited is one of the largest privately held spirits companies in the world, still owned by the descendants of Facundo Bacardi, generating billions of dollars in sales a year. Its rum poured in almost every country on the planet. The empire did not just survive being seized. It became bigger in exile than it had ever been at home. And that is the strange, dark heart of the Bacardi story. Most of these tales end with a fortune destroyed and a family broken. This one does not. The Bacardis kept the fortune and grew it beyond anything Facundo could have dreamed. What they lost was something a distillery cannot replace. They lost the island itself, the monument in Santiago, the headquarters in Havana, the graves, the streets their name was written into, the country their family had helped to build. All of it sits on the other side of a line they cannot cross, in the hands of the state that took it. They won the rum. They lost the homeland. And for 100 years they had believed those two things were the same. A deaf immigrant filtered rough liquor through charcoal in a rented shed and dreamed of making something fine. He built a name so strong that a revolution could seize every building he ever owned and still not kill it. But he also tied that name to a country and to the idea of controlling that country's fate. And in the end, the country was the one thing the family could never buy, or win, or take back. The bat still flies on the bottle. The rum still pours in every bar in the world. But the island where it was born belongs to someone else now, and no amount of money has ever been able to change that. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe. And tell us in the comments which empire we should take apart next. There are more of these coming, and every single one begins the same way. With a name the whole world knows, and a history almost nobody has heard.